Good Saturday morning, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. And let's have a little bit of a frivolous discussion. Since it is June and things are slow, things are chill, we're all just kind of sitting here waiting for stuff to happen. Occasionally, a little something sneaks out of Seahawks camp over at the VMAC. Occasionally, we hear something that's kind of interesting or compelling, but it is probably the slowest month of the year. So let's have a little bit of a frivolous conversation around a report that came out yesterday. And I usually don't discuss things like this on this channel. Every now and then it's fun, but for most of the year, there's so much stuff that is actually happening that there's only so much time you can spend on stuff that didn't actually happen. And especially to discuss this now, more than a year after it would have happened, had it happened, it just seems a little bit, like I said, frivolous. But maybe that's okay every now and then. So let's talk about this report here, because this is really interesting to me on a couple different levels, even though it ultimately doesn't mean anything. So we got this report that the Eagles had a deal with the Seattle Seahawks last year that was basically done for Russell Wilson. And the trade would have gotten done, but Wilson refused to be traded to Philadelphia. There's also this article over here on Yahoo that goes into some of the details of it, but it's basically the same idea. Wilson did not want to get traded to Philadelphia. Were it not for that, he would have gotten traded to Philadelphia. Now, we also heard at the time of the trade to Denver that Washington had also made overtures at Wilson, and Wilson also did not want to get traded to Washington. Now, that one's pretty easy. That one's pretty obvious. Washington's a mess. They haven't been a really good team in a long time, and they also have that ownership issue. Who would want to get traded there under any circumstance? That one, I don't feel the need to really talk about, but this one is interesting for a couple different reasons. One, if this trade had gotten done, because the implication is clear, Denver came in later. Denver came in for Wilson after the Aaron Rodgers drama had cleared up. They came in after the Eagles and Seahawks had already attempted to make a deal. So the Eagles were there first. So there's that aspect. And then there's the aspect of why did Wilson refuse to be traded to Philadelphia? The first part is just kind of fun to think about, right? Well, maybe not so much fun for us, because there's no way that would have worked out as well as for Seattle as this did, right? If Wilson gets traded to Philadelphia, then he's on a team with probably an even better defense than the one he had last year. It's a team with a more powerful running game that can probably disguise his decline as a player, although he won't be able to do the things that Jalen Hurts does, and they probably can't trade for A.J. Brown because they gave up the assets to go get Russell Wilson. So now it's just probably the Alabama receiver, forget his name, the really skinny guy who won the Heisman, and not a whole lot else. So you think about the way it turned out, you think about the way the Eagles like to play, and they probably wouldn't have been as good as they were, but they would have still had that phenomenal defense that was powered by one of the greatest pass rushers in NFL history, really, and they still would have been able to have some semblance of a good running game. Devonta Smith, by the way, I just remembered his name. Yeah, they still would have had Devonta Smith. They still would have had a good coach. They still would have had a good system, good coaching staff. It probably would have turned out a lot better than what happened in Denver. We probably don't get nearly as good of a pick, although it probably would have been better than the pick the Eagles ended up getting at the very end of the first. I think the downgrade from from Hurts to Wilson, especially in that offense, is worth several wins. So it would have been more of a middling first round pick, and it would have been kind of a shrug your shoulders trade. So when you think about the way history kind of got altered there, all because Wilson didn't want to get traded to Philadelphia, it is pretty interesting. to imagine where we would be compared to where he would be, where the Eagles would be, where the Broncos would be, because the Broncos would have been left out in the cold. They probably just go through another bad year, probably keep their pick that probably still ends up being somewhere around the top 5. So you put all that stuff together and you've got a pretty interesting what if scenario there, right? But here's the stuff that's really kind of note to me. First of all, if you buy this report, and I do, I don't think there's any reason to not buy it. In fact, I suspected this was the case for a while. We were willing to trade Russell Wilson within the conference. Now, I know it's not the same thing as trading him within the division. That would be a big, red flag if the Seahawks were willing to trade Wilson to, the 49ers or something. It's not the same thing, but it's still kind of surprising, right? If you're willing to trade him within the conference, not that I necessarily think like this, but a lot of people do, that implies that you don't think he's going to really come back to haunt you, right? Because when you trade him to the other conference, you don't have to really worry about him that much. You play him once every 4 years, probably. And what he does has very little to do with what you do, because there's very little convergence between whatever team you trade him to and your team. You play each other, like I said, maybe once every 3 years. Maybe, because of the new scheduling crap. So that's kind of interesting. That implies to me that the team felt like he was washed up. Or at the very least that this wouldn't haunt them. It's like a diet version of when Andy Reid traded Donovan McNabb to Washington. And at the time, that was really weird. But especially now in hindsight, we can safely say that Andy Reid knew that McNabb was completely washed up and was like, I will send him to a team I have to play twice a year and not even think twice about it. And good Lord, did he end up coming out better on that one. But here's what I'm trying to figure out here. You look at the Eagles and the guys they have had at the top. I'm talking about Howie Roseman, who right now everybody loves, and everybody says Howie Roseman's the best GM in the NFL right now. But I'm not really talking about right now. I'm talking about a year ago when this trade was being discussed. You had Howie Roseman, and he had still done a lot of really impressive stuff. Now, he's been part of the Eagles organization since Andy Reid first got there, basically. I think he had a role with them in 2000. But if you want to take a look at recent history when he was actually the GM, you had the Chip Kelly era, right? You had that Chip Kelly era where Chip Kelly temporarily got GM powers for, I think it was 2 years. Maybe it was just 1 year. But Chip Kelly was the GM, and Howie Roseman stepped to the side so Chip could do that. Then when they got Chip out of there, you had Howie Roseman kind of step in and be the GM again. So you look at the transformations that the Eagles have gone over since then. They move off of the Chip Kelly thing, turn their focus to the Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson era, and within a year, they win the Super Bowl. One of the most ridiculous Super Bowls of all time with a backup quarterback. One of the most impressive turnarounds, because 2 years before they won that Super Bowl, they were a bad team. That was a team that was bad enough to get Chip Kelly fired after he had just won a power struggle. So they were flushing things, and they just went and won. And then, over the next couple years, things started to diminish. The next year, they won a playoff game. The next year, they squeaked into the playoffs. Then they had a really bad year, and they're like, okay, we're flushing it again. We're not going to fall in love with Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson just because they helped us win one Super Bowl a few years ago. No, we think this is over. We're going to move off it now. We're not going to sit here for another 3 years so they can prove that they're done. We're going to move proactively. So they do that, and the next year, they fire Doug Peterson, they trade Carson Wentz. They're sitting on a gigantic amount of dead money because they had to trade Wentz, and they still make the playoffs. It was kind of like a better version of what the Seahawks did last year. We had all that dead Wilson money and we made the playoffs. Eagles had, I believe, significantly more dead Carson Wentz money, and they were able to make the playoffs too. And they were probably a little bit better than we were last year overall. So You get that, and then they turn right around to the last year where they make the Super Bowl. Of course, that's after the hypothetical Wilson trade would have gone down. But the point I'm making is that even 14, 15, 16 months ago, Howie Roseman was a very well-respected general manager, considered to be one of the best in the NFL. He makes mistakes. Chip Kelly was a mistake. Giving more power to Chip Kelly was also probably a mistake while we're at it. Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, of course. But when he makes the mistake, he moves on quickly. He finds ways to overcome it. He undoes the mistake and bounces back very, very quickly. Because every GM's going to make mistakes. Like, this is not trying to find that GM that never makes mistakes. That doesn't happen. But this is a GM who is really good at maintaining the flexibility at all times to say, okay, this isn't working. Let's just move on. Out of here. Let's move on to the next thing. And that next thing is going to start paying dividends very quickly. I mean, the Eagles went from a awful team, like genuinely one of the worst teams in the league 2 years ago, to a playoff team last year, to almost winning the Super Bowl this most recent season. So, given the fact that they have that great mind in place, given the fact that they have a long, I'm going to say, run of success over the last almost 25 years now, since Andy Reid got there, the Eagles have been one of the more successful franchises in the league. They played in several Super Bowls. They've had a lot of winning seasons, a lot of playoff years, a lot of playoff wins. They won a Super Bowl. So here's my big question. Given all that, why would Wilson not want to play for Philadelphia? That's the thing that is really kind of interesting here. And again, at the end of the day, I don't really care. The bottom line is he didn't. And the only thing that really matters is that he blocked the trade, which allowed the Denver trade to happen, which worked out like a dream for Seahawks fans. There's no way it could have gone any better. But I have to ask why, when the Eagles have a proven track record of being a good team. I mean, the year before the hypothetical Wilson trade, they made the playoffs with a quarterback who could barely throw the ball 8 yards accurately. They made the playoffs with a team that was completely crippled on the cap space front. And I put all that together, and I'm trying to figure out, why would Wilson not want to get traded there with Howie Roseman, with that team that has a long track record of success? But he wants to go to Denver, a team that hasn't really even been close to good since Peyton Manning retired, a team that had missed the playoffs, 6-7 years in a row after Manning retired, no winning seasons. I know it's a storied franchise because they've made a lot of Super Bowls and had somewhat recent success, but the track record for Denver when Wilson showed up was not particularly good. So why would he not want to go to Philly, but he would be willing to go to Denver? I think the theory that a lot of people will have is that he did not want to. He didn't want to live in Philadelphia. He preferred living in Denver for whatever reason, and that makes sense. Like, that's believable. I'd probably rather live in Denver than Philadelphia too. One theory that I've thrown out in the past, when I was talking about the fact that it seemed like there was an Eagles trade that Wilson didn't want a part of, it's just this report kind of confirms it. Maybe there was some sort of stipulation where Philadelphia was refusing to extend Wilson's contract if they made the trade for him, but it was understood that Denver was going to. Maybe something like that. Then again, that makes you wonder, why did Wilson not get extended until a couple months after the trade to Denver? Was there maybe some sort of holdup that didn't allow it to happen immediately, but it was known that it was always going to happen? I don't know. But either way, the trade did not happen, seemingly, for reasons that didn't have anything to do with football. Because I think you'd much rather go to Philadelphia than Denver if your only concern is football and winning. So, I don't know. I'm trying to piece this one together. Let me know what you guys think about this one. I don't know why you wouldn't want to go to Philadelphia if you want to be part of a winning team. See you guys later. Go Hawks.